Welcome, 8th graders, to today's Explainer. We've got a really fascinating historical journey ahead of us as we look back at the early foundations of representative government. Okay, let's dive into this. Today we're going to discover the secret historical ingredient to a healthy, functioning representative government. It's an ingredient that a lot of early colonists realized was absolutely essential if they were actually going to pull off governing themselves successfully.
I want you to think about this direct question for a second. Can a town survive on rules alone? Seriously, imagine a community where they've written down the absolute best, most perfect laws on paper. Every single rule is completely logical. But what if the people who have to enforce those laws, and the citizens who are supposed to follow them, completely lack character? If people are fundamentally dishonest, selfish, or cruel, do those perfect laws actually matter? The early colonists realized super quickly that laws alone cannot make a community flourish. The leaders and the citizens need something more.
So, here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the glue of government. Second, we're defining civic virtue. Third, we'll see why laws aren't enough. Fourth, we'll look at civic virtue in action. And finally, morality and true education.
Let's jump right into Section 1, the glue of government.
Early communities were stepping into totally uncharted territory. They were trying to figure out how to rule themselves without a king looking over their shoulder every single minute. And they quickly discovered that civic virtue is literally the essential glue of self-government. Think about what glue actually does, right? It holds things together when they would otherwise just fall apart. Without the glue of virtues like honesty, a town's public records simply can't be trusted. Without patience, a community debate over a new law will completely unravel into shouting and chaos. You absolutely need this glue to maintain stability, so the communities can actually plan long-term projects and support fair, functioning courts.
Moving on to Section 2, defining civic virtue.
Where do these ideas even come from? Well, in early colonial history, religious communities heavily influenced expectations for right and wrong and what a person's civic duty should look like. Now, what's really interesting about this is that virtue wasn't just some lofty, invisible idea. It was all about daily, actionable habits. We're talking habits like honesty, self-control, and service that support responsible leadership and a healthy community. Religious life shaped these daily routines. Things like observing rest days, practicing charity, and building schools. It was all about putting it into practice every single day.
These habits were deeply rooted in religious convictions. Consider the text from Micah 6:8. What does the Lord require of you? To act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Historically, these specific traits, justice, mercy, and humility, were viewed as the absolute bedrock of fair and compassionate leadership. Think about it. If a leader walks humbly and loves mercy, they're so much more likely to actually listen to their constituents and lead with fairness rather than just pure arrogance.
That brings us to Section 3, why laws aren't enough.
I want to ask you a serious question. What happens to a society when its citizens are highly intelligent but totally lack a moral compass to do the right thing? Honestly, intelligence without a moral compass can be a real game changer. In a bad way for a representative government. And this brilliantly illustrates the solution early colonists came up with. They drew a direct line between private character at home and public duty in government. They believed that a trustworthy person at home, someone who is honest with their family and fair in their private business, is naturally going to be a much more responsible voter or representative. You really can't separate who you are in private from who you are in public.
Because they linked private character to public duty, these early communities developed shared moral standards. When inevitable conflicts arose, and let's be real, they always do, because people will always disagree, they appeal to these shared morals to resolve their disputes peacefully. Even during intense disagreements, having a shared understanding of right and wrong encouraged civil discourse instead of violence. It allowed them to debate safely and fairly, which is a huge deal when you're building a society from scratch.
All right, let's look at Section 4, civic virtue in action.
In a lot of colonies, citizens were expected to fulfill very specific, practical duties. They had to serve on juries, pay taxes, attend town meetings, and care for their neighbors. That meant helping maintain roads or taking turns on the night watch. Fulfilling these duties requires absolute integrity. Think about serving on a jury, or even being the guy trusted to ring the town bell without sleeping in. You have to show up, you have to commit to telling the truth, and you have to weigh evidence fairly. You just can't do that without civic virtue.
Let's move to and see how this builds when we look at education in these early communities. Imagine a town pooling its precious, limited resources to fund a school. Why do that? Well, religious groups emphasized literacy primarily so people could read scripture. But this very same literacy prepared people to read laws, petitions, and ballots. By learning to read for their faith, they became empowered to be informed voters, which is totally vital for representation.
Here's another incredibly powerful example of virtue in action. Imagine an elected representative who's debating a new law. This law will greatly help the entire town, but it's actually going to hurt this representative's own personal business. If he possesses civic virtue, he votes for the law anyway. He places the common good of the town way above his own personal gain. That spirit of putting service before self, that is exactly why representation actually works.
And that leads us to our final section, Section 5, Morality and True Education.
This brings us to the modern philosophy of the HeroesmartAcademy Godly Learners series. The core idea is super simple. Biblical morality must be intertwined with education because education without morality ultimately hurts us. To speak right to you 8th graders for a second, what is the point of being smart and supposedly educated if you just keep making bad choices that hurt yourself and others? True education requires real character, not just passing grades.
True education brings peace, not chaos. As the quote from Romans 8:6-7 promises, there is peace of mind for everyone who keeps their mind spiritual. That's the actual experience we see when people truly engage with this kind of learning. When you combine a strong spiritual and moral foundation with a really solid education, the ultimate reward is peace of mind and the ability to truly, meaningfully contribute to society.
So, the crucial point is this. History shows us over and over that a government by the people only survives if the people have the character to sustain it. How are you going to use your education and your character to serve your community? The survival of self-rule doesn't just depend on the leaders in the history books, it depends on the habits you are building today. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.